Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to bring you the Holy and Disc Nerfs. Oh my god, they just happened tonight at the time of this recording. At this point, they're probably a couple hours old. I wanted to give just a quick review about what's going on with the Discipline, primarily, and Holy Nerfs that are going to be going out very soon at the time that you're watching this video. Alright, so starting it off, let's dig into it. Smite damage reduced by 6% for Holy and Discipline, which is kind of an interesting thing to look at because the primary point, as you'll see in the article, which is linked in the description below, is their focus is going to be on the balance issues in the pre-patch. That's the reason that they're giving, is that there's balance issues in pre-patch, which honestly in my response is going to be kind of like, yeah, so there's 1 week left to pre-patch at the time of this video, and now is the point where we're starting to get buffs, nerfs for classes. It's kind of an odd point for me. Like why they want to do that, I guess, is just accumulate more data and be able to see where the chips are kind of falling before they do the standard expected buffs, nerfs right as normal heroic Uldia release. And once they do that, which they do every single time a new raid comes out, just about, they go see how it works through normal heroic, and then mythic is the following week, and then they see if they need to nerf anything after that, right? Those things are pretty expected, so I was kind of surprised that they did it here. Especially when Disc gets a lot of damage nerfs, and I was so excited to be leveling his Disc, because it's just super powerful, and probably still will be. But starting off, smite damage reduced by 6% here, and this also kind of reflects that they don't really care too terribly much about, at least so far, the damage that all the healers have been doing, because starting off with specifically nerfing it for both specs, Holy's DPS was already really low in Mythic Plus, so I was kind of surprised, and unfortunately just kind of puts Holy Priest lower on the tier for M+. Not really a big deal for them in raids, but it is quite significant for Discipline, of course, in raids and in Mythic Plus, because their damage is, quite frankly, absurd in Mythic Plus environment right now, and they're just able to dish out crazy amount of it, so not terribly surprised that it's on the Disc side, but affecting both is kind of weird. Divine Star healing has been increased to 50% of spell power, was 40%. I love this change, and I wonder if they might actually go a little bit higher up on this, because if you get everybody stacked up together, it's pretty well expected that Divine Star would be an amazing talent to take. But as I've gone through raid testing a lot through Uldia, I haven't really found fights where you're going to be having everybody stacked up constantly enough to gain huge value out of Divine Star, compared to just using Halo and hitting everybody every single time with Halo, right? The fact that neither spell has target cap is very important, so knowing how many times you'll be able to hit everybody is important to look at as well. So it raises its competitiveness, but I think it's still going to be looking and yearning for the right fight to be able to use this ability. So nice it's getting buffed though, nice seeing it get a little bit of love. So digging into the big stuff though, the meat and bones. Discipline, Shadow Pain reduced by 9%, Shadow Fiend, damage reduced by 16%, Mindbender by 8%. And then, of course, adjusting some little bugs here and there. Very important things. Shadow Pain, kind of no surprise, and this, in some ways, needed to happen. About a month ago, about the time of this video, from the time of this video, Shadow Pain actually received buffs for Shadow Priest, and by extension, it buffed Discipline Priest Shadow Pain as well. And what that caused was Purge the Wicked to basically be useless. You really were getting almost the exact same dot damage out of Shadow Pain as you were getting out of Purge the Wicked. So what was the difference? What was the increase? What was the value by taking Purge the Wicked? Not really anything. So with this change, there actually is a gap. There actually is a difference in damage between Purge the Wicked. I still think that you're going to be taking Halo for most raid encounters, or most all raid encounters thus far, but you might be able to get a little bit of loving out of Purge the Wicked on maybe in instances where you're not going to need like the burst effect, or it might be scary to try to get the burst effect out of Halo. Because if you have to hold on to Halo for half the instance and only use it for like a couple boss fights, it can be kind of a weak value there. So maybe that's what we're going to see out of it. Shadow Fiend, really no surprise to see its damage nerfed. It's incredibly strong on a 3-minute cooldown, and in a lot of cases helps you out DPS the DPS in a lot of M+ dungeons. So the fact that it gets nerfed isn't too terribly a surprise. Mindbender, of course, will have to get nerfed to be in line, in ratio, I guess you could say, to keep it in ratio with Shadow Fiend. Unfortunately, the Pain buff a month ago, like I mentioned, wasn't in ratio with Purge the Wicked, which is why I'm not surprised by the Shadow Pain nerf, right? So summary, the big important things that I would say for Discipline though, where do we stand was the big question after that. is that we're still in good shape. Discipline is not going to be as focused on atonement healing as it was in Legion, where Legion had like, I believe 70% of our healing, on average, like 65-70% was coming from atonement sources, right? In BfA, I think it's going to get reduced. It still will be incredibly important, but it will be reduced from that massive ratio that we've seen previously, and you will be focusing a lot on more of a defensive build in terms of your penance usage going into BfA, especially for Uldir and especially for cutting edge, bleeding edge progression rating. The spot healing of Disc Priests will still be very powerful, and the changes that went in today do not affect probably our most OP ability in defensive penance. While you will not always be using penance defensively, you still will be using it offensively when you have a large amount of atonements out. Defensive penance use will be ridiculously strong in BfA and incredibly helpful to your raid team, right? The amount of focus healing you'll be able to put into targets, the likelihood of running Twist of Fate and Contrition, and focusing a lot of your penances on defensive use will be very high here. So I think in many areas, Discipline's raid healing isn't in too bad of a shape. The other important thing to keep in mind for Discipline is just before these nerfs went in, we received some buffs in the form of our Azurite traits, right? As you're seeing on your screen right now, there were some considerable buffs to the scaling of Azurite traits, where they were giving us the most value, right? And some of the biggest ones and some of the biggest changes that we got are to Azurite traits that augment the damage of Smite, right? So for example, Wheel and Woe, where whenever you're using defensive penance, your Smite damage increases, right? If we're following this build of using lots of defensive penance, like I mentioned in a raiding environment, well, that's just constant Smite buffs that we'll be receiving. And because the scaling of it has been increased, the higher eye level Azurite pieces we're going to get, the more valuable Smite's going to be. Gift of Forgiveness as well, whenever you're having at least 3 atonements out, like I outlined recently in the Azurite video, you're having an increased damage to Smite. That scaling also got increased. So you're having these additional value that's already been scaled up for it. So I think at this point, the Smite change, for example, is to make sure that Smite doesn't get out of control for Discipline. Or they're already looking at it and saying, with the Azurite traits in effect, if we just start stacking those, we go like, 1 Enduring Luminescence, then we start stacking, and pushing for Wheel and Woe or Gift of Forgiveness to buff up our Smite damage, something like that, I think it reflects a concern that Smite could get out of control, that they don't want to have that much atonement healing as a focus, and they're kind of just preempting that. So that's what it more reflects to me from the change. But like I said, because penance defensively and offensively hasn't really been messed around with, it's still going to be a huge part of our toolkit, and it will be incredibly valuable going into Uldir. So while this does kind of bring us down in like the pre-patch scenario, makes us definitely a lot more balanced, because Discipline and Holy for that matter, as we'll see in a sec, we're definitely very powerful. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal going into Uldir, because we won't be totally reliant on the spells that were nerfed there. With Holy Priest, Binding Heal has now cost 2.4% of mana, was 2%. I believe at the start of beta alpha process, Binding Heal costs about like 1.6% of your mana. They keep on ramping up the cost because it is such a mana efficient ability to the point that you could almost constantly be spamming it. Obviously with this mana cost change, you will not be able to, but it does make sure that you're focusing a little bit more on when it's going to be best to also receive healing value out of yourself. I also think with a lot of the talent changes that we've been seeing, this reflects that they want to push us towards using Circle of Healing. Now, Circle of Healing is not a bad cooldown at all. It's not a bad ability at all. But the problem is that it lacks Holy Writ synergy. It's a more efficient and mobile version of Prayer of Healing. It does a lot more healing for the cost that for the healing per cost compared to Prayer of Healing. But the trade-off is no Holy Writ synergy going into it. Binding Heal being that very efficient heal, getting a cooldown reduction for both Holy Writs at once, makes a big difference. So I think at this point it's pretty much trying to balance out the use of Binding Heal and Circle Healing together. But you also have to keep in mind that Holy Priest, like we mentioned with Azurite traits before, just like in Disc scenario, has some loving tools for other abilities and has other tools for scaling abilities. So while they received a nerf for like their mana return Azurite trait, they did receive some buffs, of course, for using heal more effectively, where Everlasting Light, which restores additional HP whenever you use heal, but it's based on your missing mana. This opens up the possibility that if you're going to be using heal more frequently, whenever you're lower percentage of mana, this can gain a little bit more value, and you will be able to use that more effectively depending on the fight. I don't think it's going to be quite a top tier pick, but again, I think some of these changes are reflecting, anticipating where the specs are going to be going and making sure that they're not going to be too crazy powerful as we go deeper into Uldir here. So not too big of a surprise there. It also makes it a little bit harder to reduce the cooldown of Holy Word Salvation. For example, if you have to, only be using heal, the cast will be much longer than Binding Heal, which will slow down your Holy Word returns, which also slows down the return of Holy Word Salvation's cooldown, right? So now Holy Word Salvation's cast time is increased to 2.5 seconds. And since the ability's inception, they have done whatever they can to like undercut and nerf progressively the value of this ability. So it is kind of sad to see. I think Holy Word Salvation will still be a very powerful cooldown. As much as they're trying to push it down and equalize it with Apotheosis and Light of the Naru beside it, I still feel that we're going to be using Salvation quite constantly going into Uldir. And at this point, they're just trying to make sure that Holy Priest is not just this like crazy mana efficient attrition healer that can continue casting forever, right? Additional survivability bonus with Angel's Mercy makes sense. They really want to push us to get rid of Feather, and they always keep on introducing more defensive options that we always ignore. So I don't think this is really going to change our mind on the Angel's Mercy talent with Desperate Prayer, but who knows, maybe we'll have some immobile fights or something like that where there'll be no need. But if history's any tool, I really doubt it. Holy's position going into BfA, I think they'll still be a very favorable healer. The AoE potential that they have is going to be very high, but I'm also interested in seeing how they will fare in some of Uldir's more mobile encounters, as well as how they will perform on spot healing, right? Their ability to constantly be casting flash heals, for example, is not a strong point for them if there's 2 or 3 targets that are taking damage at a pretty consistent rate. That's not a huge point and a huge win for them, because they want to make sure they're getting everybody into their Sanctify. They want Prayer Minis to be bouncing and casting around all over. So while I think their AoE healing and their raid type healing will be good, I think spot healing is going to be a little bit on the weaker side compared to Discipline going into Uldir. So both, I think, will be having more than earning their place into an Uldir raid team. But I think it's important to look at some of the strengths and weaknesses as we're going forward. That's it for me, guys. Let me know what you guys think about the recent changes that went on for Holy and Discipline. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out the live stream linked in the description below as well. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.